food has to do with how people organize to impact the availability of food, the cost of food, what role government plays in making food available, whether the ways in which governments support farmers, the ways in which governments make sure food is available to people who can't afford to buy it. So it's a very critical policy area, especially in the United States, where we have very little in the way of welfare policies. Much of the support we give to low-income people, the government gives to low-income people, is in the form of different kinds of food aid, like what used to be called food stamps, now called SNAP, school meals, food aid to developing countries, and a whole variety of support to programs that support the elderly, daycare centers. A lot of that is funded by, that is food that's funded by the government and supports the work of these institutions. In terms of what kinds of issues people are debating and thinking about with food politics today, one really big one is related to the fact that the rates of obesity in this country have risen so much since the 1980s. And what kinds of government policy might help to impact those rates of obesity, whether we should be regulating the ways that big corporations are marketing food, high sugar foods that don't have much nutritional value, whether we should be taxing soda as a sugary drink that we know doesn't give people other nutrients and increases rates of obesity, whether there should be policies that require the big fast food companies and big restaurant chains to put the number of calories in meals on their menus. Those are all topics that are being debated. There's also a lot of debate about the extent to which like school meals is always a topic that's important. Like, what kind of food should we be feeding kids? How are we funding that program in ways that make the food attractive and healthy and good and makes kids want to eat it and expand what they eat? And finally, another huge topic is the one that I was mentioning of can we keep supporting food availability to low-income people? Food is like the one thing in people's budgets they can cut back on. You have to pay your rent. You have to make your car payments. You have to pay your energy. All of those things, if you don't want to be homeless, if you want to be able to get to work. And so even in middle-class families where one partner loses a job, those families can become food insecure because their whole budget is going to cover those other items. Food insecurity is defined as not having, being anxious about being able to afford food, not being able to have enough money to support a healthy diet that's appropriate to you. So how we should respond to that, how we should make sure that people have access to healthy and appropriate food is an important ongoing subject of debate, because none of our other programs work well if people don't have access to food. We can invest lots of money in schools, but if kids are coming to school hungry, they aren't able to study, they aren't able to learn. We can spend tons of money on our medical system, but if we send frail people home to environments where they don't have enough to eat, they're going to be sick again. They're going to be back in the hospital. So it sort of underlies many other issue areas, and it's one where we do have a fair number of programs to address this issue of food security, but the question is how well they're doing it. I was originally, my first profession was as a physician assistant working in healthcare, but I was also very, very interested in politics. and using politics to try to change the world for the better. I ended up becoming a speechwriter for different political candidates in the 1980s at a time when the family farm movement, so Reagan was president, and it was a period in which the United States was deregulating most industries and cutting back on most government support for low-income people. Reagan preached that the government is always a problem, that the thing that markets are going to be the way we meet people's needs. And he was so powerful and so convincing, and people liked him so much that most politicians were agreeing with him that they didn't want to support government programs. They just wanted to let the free market solve everybody's problems, except for the family farm movement, which had a very strong organizing effort saying free markets are not working for farmers. Then the more farmers produce, the lower the price of the products they produce goes. People buy only a limited quantity of food, and prices end up falling below the cost of production. And when they overproduce, it's very destructive of the environment. They use more pesticide, they use more fertilizer. So they were making a very strong argument for a more planned agricultural economy. And this was so counterintuitive, it was so different from what was happening in American politics that I was like very surprised and interested. And so when I went to graduate school, I wanted to find out how and why farmers had become so interested in the government playing such a big role in agriculture. And so in graduate school, I worked on the role of farmers' movements in shaping the American government. It turns out it goes way back, more than you want to hear right now. But back to when farmers were the vast majority of the American people and were facing a whole variety of problems that they wanted government help with addressing. And I knew when I came to the University of Pennsylvania that I wanted to teach service learning courses because that's how I got engaged and involved in politics. I think it's the best way to learn about politics. But this is an urban school. I wasn't going to just teach about the politics of agriculture. And since I was working as a physician assistant at the same time, I started to hear at grand rounds about the obesity epidemic. And I thought, oh, I could do the politics of food and we could address obesity, food insecurity, and agriculture, and I can develop placements where students are working on issues related to food in urban schools, with the Hunger Coalition, and various service placements that I've developed over time. In terms of what's challenging for students in thinking about the politics of food, I actually love teaching it because I think it's a topic that students relate to very easily. Everybody eats. One of the assignments I give them is to interview their parents or their grandparents to find out how the way their family eats has changed or not over time, and to think about what are the key causal factors that have shaped how their family eats. And that's sometimes it's ethnic background, sometimes it's religion, sometimes it's ideas about health, sometimes it's the family becoming more economically secure. It is a way that people learn how to think causally about what impacts a kind of major part of our lives, that I think is compelling and fun for them to realize how much they know just from their own lives and their families' lives, and then to start to think about how their families' lives have been impacted by different government programs. Learning about the agriculture part at this point is much more obscure to most American students. They don't have, every now and then I'll have a student who grew up on a farm, but not often. But the issues of what is the food that was on our table, how did we eat, what most impacted our eating, most students can engage with and think about. So in the politics of food, it's a service learning course where I have a variety of placements where students can learn about the role food plays in people's lives. One is with the Coalition Against Hunger, where people are calling their office. It's a small nonprofit. Low-income people who are having trouble accessing enough food call their office to see if they might be eligible for what used to be called food stamps. It's now called SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, where it depends on your income, the number of people in your family, your rent, your energy costs, your housing costs. The coalition can take all that information and give you an estimate of how much, whether or not you would be eligible and what your benefits would be. They can also tell you where the nearest food cupboard or soup kitchen is in your neighborhood. These are charitable food organizations, often run by churches, there's hundreds of them in the city of Philadelphia that are open different days of the week in different places, but the coalition can try to help you access them. And my students there just answer the phone, but taking all those phone calls gives them a much greater understanding of Philadelphia and what low-income people face in Philadelphia. It's a tremendous learning experience, as well as what these food resources are and how they work. In the West Philadelphia schools, students work in after-school programs where one of the big issues that's occurred one of the reasons the obesity epidemic became such an issue is big food companies have tremendously multiplied the availability of fast food. So many kids are growing up without learning how to cook. I mean, it used to, and so one of the things, and that's expensive, and often the food that you can just buy as fast food isn't that healthy. And it's a skill that that's fun to learn, and that gives you access to many other skills, reading and math. So my students are involved in an after-school cooking program working with kids. There's also sometimes after-school gardening programs. There's MANA is an organization that works to deliver food to people with severe illnesses that have a significant nutritional component, like HIV/AIDS or cancer or heart disease, to deliver healthy, appropriate meals to people that might have trouble cooking for themselves. So the service learning component of the class gives the students direct experience with these different types of problems associated with food and different ways that nonprofits or government programs are trying to address them. And the students, meanwhile, are assisting those programs to some degree. So it's a sort of mutual benefit is the goal. And then in class, it's a 3-hour class where we bring in speakers and have panels on these different topics. And then the students also meet in small groups to debate and discuss what policies they think are most appropriate to address those problems. Another super hot topic right now is food waste, that half the food we produce is not eaten in the United States. And so the energy cost of that, the water costs of that, it's a huge environmental issue. It contributes to global warming. So if we could start to figure out policies that help us use food more efficiently so that we're not just throwing it away and having it contribute to landfills, which creates more greenhouse gases, but instead we're making sure that we're using food in ways that's healthy and appropriate and gets it to people who need it. That's another topic that it's clear that we need government or business organized differently than it is now. They're not just thinking, how does each food business make maximum profit, but instead, how can we make sure we're all working together to use these food resources properly.